What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to main slate matchups. So this week, we're not just covering the main slate, which is Sunday slate. We're going to cover all 6 of the wild card games. So let's jump in, and we're just going to go right to it. And actually, I should say ahead of time, I will talk some DFS. I'll try to talk about all 3 slates, whether it's the 6-gamer, the 2-gamer, or the main slate 3-gamer on Sunday. We're going to talk a lot, though, about props. And the reason for that is when we are analyzing these matchups, and we're finding different advantages for certain players, it's a hell of a lot easier to say, hey, normally he's at 30, but in this matchup, his line should be 40, therefore we have an edge. Then, he typically should be around 30 yards. We have him for 40 yards, and therefore he's a good DFS play. There's so much more that goes into whether a guy is good on DraftKings, correlation, game theory, ownership, all that good stuff. So it's a lot easier to talk these matchups just as it relates to props, but I will try to throw in some DFS thoughts as well. So let's jump in. First game, Houston and the Chargers. And I'm actually going to jump to this StatsHub tab. By the way, anyone tuning in, I'll mention this a couple times throughout the show, but StatsHub is free to use this week. So if you're not an FTN subscriber just yet, you don't even have to become a subscriber to use StatsHub the way that I'm using it here on the show. All you have to do is sign up for a free account at FTN, and you can use StatsHub for this week and this week only. So what I have done here is I've selected weeks 11 through 17. I want to basically use the second half of the season, kind of after teams have maybe adjusted and they figured out what works for them, or at least what they think works for them. So I don't want to see a team who played a ton of man early in the season and then really shifted towards zone in the later half of the year still show up near the top of the board or in the middle of man rates when they have played a lot of zone of late. So we are with 11 through 17, we are getting what teams are most likely to come into the playoffs with. And we're also eliminating week 18, where a lot of these teams were either not really competing anything, potentially even trying not to show too much on film. So weeks 11 through 17 is what we're going to use when we're looking at what kind of tendencies teams are using defensively. And then we'll use the season-long sample offensively to kind of figure out what coverage is, or blitz versus non-blitz, what fits each player the best. So LAC is where we will begin, and we're going to start here on the passing efficiency tab, looking at explosive plays allowed. And you'll see here both LAC and Houston near the top over the last 7 weeks or so in explosive passing yards allowed. Now, one of the interesting things here is LA has given this up kind of in all ways. Houston does not allow deep passes. They've been outstanding at not allowing deep passes. But why are they up here? Because they give up a ton of yards after the catch. You can see the 3rd highest yards after the catch total in this time frame. So when we think about which Chargers to use, we'll have to think about some yards after the catch stuff. But first, let's talk about the LAC defense and how Houston might match up with them. So we know they are going to give up some explosives in the passing game, but how about the running game? And sure enough, they will also give up some explosives here in the run game. So you'll see here the 5th most explosive rushing yards this time frame. Kind of hilarious how much higher Carolina was than everybody else in this time frame. But this paints a pretty good picture, and it paints a very clear picture of how this Houston offense might have success, because the downside is this Chargers defense also creates a ton of pressure. And when you can create pressure against a team like Houston, who if you saw the some of the stuff that Frank has been tweeting out, his combined blown block rate, both in the pass game and run game stuff. We know this Houston offensive line, bottom of the barrel. They are the worst in the NFL, and consequently, CJ Stroud has been pressured all season. Now, some of that is on CJ Stroud too, but you get a quarterback who tends to hold the ball too long, and you get an offensive line that is just terrible. And actually, to be honest, I think some of it is also Stroud is not doing a good enough job of preparing the offensive line pre-snap, having the right protections called for the pressures that are going to come. But regardless of what the issue is that they face too much pressure. So they have a chance for explosives in the passing game. They have a chance for explosives on the ground. But if they can't get those, then they're at the mercy of the pass rush. And so I think from a DFS perspective, this is actually a fairly simple one. the path to success for Houston's offense starts with running the ball successfully. If they can run the ball well and slow down the pass rush in that way, now they can maybe get the explosives downfield. So on the 2-game Saturday slate, especially, I will be using the idea of I'm either using both Joe Mixon and Nico Collins, or I'm using neither, and then I'm probably using I shouldn't say probably, and then I'm using the Chargers defense instead. So one of the other there is certainly going to be my approach to this first game. Some other notes from this game I don't think that are too noteworthy. The Chargers are a bad tight end matchup, so not a great spot for Dalton Schultz. They're a good wide receiver one matchup, but like we already kind of know what the path for Nico Collins is. They need to have those explosives downfield. We know they're going to key on him, and we know that the Chargers are going to have a more focused game plan defensively to slow down Nico Collins than what they have previously done throughout the season, just because it's, number one, a playoff game, but also because Nico Collins is the entire passing offense for Houston at this point. Maybe that means that, Deontay Johnson could be sneaky. I think I want to take the approach of I need to see it first to believe it, but was out there. I did get 4 targets this past week, so maybe he finds something with this team. Who knows? The only other big thing about this game as we now switch to the other side of the ball, Houston's defense and the Chargers offense. We already talked about the fact they don't give up many explosives on the ground. They will give up successful runs. They allow a very high success rate on the ground, but not a lot of explosives. Where they have had the most trouble, and I'll actually go to this tab here and take a look at the full season for this one, just because it's already a small sample thing. Where they have struggled, where they have been vulnerable, is against scrambles. And Mina Kimes talked about this before the game against the Ravens because it's Lamar Jackson. But it has been true throughout the entire season. It has remained true down the stretch. This Houston defense does struggle with scrambles allowed. And one thing I'll note here, it's not just that they are allowing a lot of scrambles. It's also, check out the EPA allowed, 29.17. That is the second highest in the league. So it's not just that they're allowing scrambles, it's that they're allowing key scrambles in key moments. That's when Justin Herbert is most likely to take off. So first prop that I actually want to bring up here, Justin Herbert, let me blow this up a little bit for you guys. Over 18.5 rushing yards, I do think looks really strong here. Definitely going to be a lean of mine. I don't know for sure yet that it's going to be a play, but I do feel pretty good about it. So over 18.5 rushing yards for Justin Herbert might be the very first place that we go. Reminder, as always, if you guys are watching on Twitter, head over to YouTube, and it's just the FTN YouTube channel. That way you can participate in the live YouTube chat. You guys can drop questions on any matchup, on any player, and we will get to those as well. So last thing on this Chargers offense, Houston defense. Remember, Houston very vulnerable to yards after the catch. The problem with that for this Chargers team is that they don't get a ton after the catch. So let me clear these filters. We'll take a look now at receiving and just take a look at some yards after the catch stuff. So if we look total, they'll notice no Chargers are near the top of the list. So in fact, we can see, really good numbers are going to be anything 400 plus is going to be the absolute top of the board. But as we go to the Chargers here, you'll notice they don't have anybody who does that. So when we think about, okay, which Charger receiver can have a ton of success in this game, it's a little bit tough to answer because the best is Ladd McConkey, but he's even under 400 yards after the catch and only 4.8 yards after the catch per reception. So it's not like he's getting those big plays because of what he does after the catch. Remember, that's what we have found, right? The Houston defense, they give up very, very few deep passes, and yet they give up a lot of explosive passes. Why? Because they give up a lot of explosive yards after the catch type receptions. Which of these Chargers is actually capable of doing that? When the yards after the catch per reception leaders on the team, Will Dissly, slow tight end, and J.K. Dobbins out of the backfield. So I think that this is actually just a difficult matchup all around for this Chargers offense. It's probably going to need to be a pretty heroic Herbert performance. and it's probably going to need to be a Herbert performance with his legs, at least to some degree, on some key third downs, things of that nature, if that offense is going to have success. They might just win a very low-scoring game if their defense can get pressure. They also might just try to run the ball a lot with J.K. Dobbins. So I don't hate the over on J.K. Dobbins rushing. In fact, I think one thing what we can do here is you can very easily either go over on J.K. Dobbins 60.5 and under on Joe Mixon's 71.5, or you can flip that around and do the reverse where you're taking the under on J.K. Dobbins and the over on Joe Mixon. I think either of those are going to be so well correlated that the pairing is good, even if you don't have a strong take on either of them individually. So if you do have a strong take on one of them individually, go with that one and then just flip it for the other guy. I think that will work pretty well. And it will certainly work well over on pick six, where correlation is everything. You can kind of build that in with some other stacks as well. Like maybe you would say under on J.K. Dobbins rushing, which means that they're dropping back a lot. And if they're dropping back a lot, that's going to help Herbert get those scrambles. So you might go over on the Herbert rushing yards and an over on, let's say, Will Dissly's receiving or something like that, where you can tell a story in that regard. Next game, Baltimore and Pittsburgh. So I want to go back to the tendencies tab here to start, and let's take a look at some of this coverage stuff. By the way, didn't mention a whole lot of coverage stuff from that first game because both the Chargers and Houston are kind of just middle of the pack in single high, two high, man coverage, and zone rates. The only other really noteworthy thing is that Houston doesn't blitz very often, but turns out that doesn't have many ramifications in this game, so I kind of just blew through it. Baltimore-Pittsburgh, however, we get some very strong tendency stuff kind of right off the bat. So let's go to coverage here. And the first thing that we want to see, single high rates, really, really high for Pittsburgh. And we've kind of known this all season. They also played 75% single high in the two games against this Baltimore offense. So we know that they're going to come with a ton of single high. We also know on the season, this is really cool. On the season, or at least, in this part of the season, this Pittsburgh team doesn't blitz a whole lot. So they're up to 31.4% in this sample because it has both games against Baltimore. But on the season, their blitz rate's around 28%. But if you just look at weeks 11 and week 16, the two games they played against this Baltimore team, they blitzed 48% of the time, over 48% of the time, in fact. So when we are evaluating what this Baltimore offense is going to do, how that they can have success through the air, we have to look at single high and we have to look at versus the blitz. So let's keep that in mind for a second. We also have in the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, we know that this Pittsburgh team, bad for wide receiver ones, good for opposing tight ends, which, as you will see, fits with what we want anyway from this team. But the other super, super important piece from this game is, let's go back to this other tab here. And I want to get rid of the Chargers. And I want to go back to scrambles for a second, because this is pretty incredible. On the season, advanced filtering, rushing, run concepts, and turn scramble to true. Whoops, I might have to redo that. I can't remember. Let's see. If we go to defense, okay, that stays on there. The best team at defending scrambles by far is this Pittsburgh team. Only 63 scramble yards allowed total on the entire season. Negative EPA for scrambles. Take a look. Only two teams negative Baltimore as well, and Pittsburgh. So, I mean, this isn't like that they're just the best. Less than half of the scramble yards allowed, then the second best team at defending scrambles. And in the two games against Lamar Jackson, they allowed one scramble for 8 yards. We know they're blitzing Lamar Jackson a lot. We know that they are doing a great job of limiting the scrambles. But as I also tweeted earlier today, against Lamar Jackson specifically, it's not just that they're containing him in terms of preventing him from scrambling for big runs. They're also not letting him get out of the pocket and make plays downfield with his arm. Lamar Jackson, incredible this season. In fact, it's so good. I should bring this up. Let's see here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to passing, player efficiency, and I want to turn the out-of-pocket play situation to true. So this is what quarterbacks have done outside of the pocket throughout the season. Lamar Jackson's lead in DYAR, defense adjusted yards above replacement, is massive. Over twice as many defensive adjusted yards above replacement as the second best Matt Stafford outside of the pocket. Notice the DVOA as well, 67%, over 40 EPA, second here in DVOA, 29% from Stafford. So not just so good at scrambling, but creating plays downfield with his arm. We talk a lot about like the separation that Baltimore receivers get. Well, a lot of the time, the separation they get is because they get more time than anybody else to run around and get open because of what Lamar has done outside of the pocket. Just unbelievable. But he played against Pittsburgh twice, weeks 11 and week 16. And in that time, negative EPA on passes outside of the pocket, just 18 DYAR and down to 16.2% DVOA. So what Pittsburgh has done against him is pretty spectacular, and it's a very clear game plan that they rush the passer with some extra blitzers, and they are just so incredibly disciplined, so well coached. I know Strand just maybe doesn't want to hear that. Strand just loves to talk some hate towards Mike Tomlin, and there are some questionable decisions that Tomlin makes, but in this regard, the team is so incredibly well coached. They're so disciplined, and it has shown up time and time again against Lamar Jackson, not just this season, but in years past. This is why they have had so much success against Lamar and what he's able to do. Lamar had a very good game last time, but that was also largely just because of what the Baltimore defense was able to do with no George Pickens. But man, if you need a reason to bet against this Baltimore offense, like to me, this is it. Also, the fact that they don't have Zay Flowers this week, which is a really good segue into who we should expect to actually produce in the passing game. And so the two places we need to look, if you can remember, I got to get rid of this out of pocket filter. We want to know who on this Baltimore team succeeds against single high, and we want to know who succeeds against the blitz. So the first thing that we will do is we can now just go to coverage. We don't even have to look at some of the advanced filter stuff. Against single high, there's no question. Zay Flowers, if he were playing, would be the go-to guy. Otherwise, Mark Andrews at 2.0, same as his too high yards per out run. So no real boost for him, but he's the next best against single high behind Flowers. And you can see Bateman actually 1.8 against single high, 2.1 against too high. So surprisingly a little bit for Bateman's skill set, but he's been better against single high. We also see Isaiah Likely better against single high than against too high. So interesting. We are already pointing to tight ends, and now we get a little bit of a reason to do so in the single high. But where it really comes to fruition, now let's just go to efficiency. And here we can bring in the DYAR numbers as well. And so actually, while I am here, before I even do the blitz thing, I will use the shell coverage and go to single high this way to see who has benefited the most from a DYAR perspective. And you can see here, against single high, Andrews, Flowers, and then Rashad Bateman really goes down a little bit compared to those two guys. Now let's do the blitz. So let's get rid of the single high filter and play situation versus blitz to true. And this is where we see massive separation for Mark Andrews above everybody else. 50% DVOA, 2.4 yards per out run, and 119 DYAR on just 31 targets. That is exceptional. And then we also get a surprise showing from Justice Hill. So you need a really cheap running back on this two-game slate. Justice Hill might be the guy, and you can definitely play Justice Hill along with Derrick Henry, by the way. And then we also get Isaiah Likely, 19% DVOA, 34 DYAR, better than Rashad Bateman, who has not been good whatsoever against the blitz. Does have 1.9 yards per out run against the blitz, so it's not like he's been terrible, but he's been a much better player in a lot of the like opposite tendencies of what we should see from this Pittsburgh defense. So Mark Andrews, kind of the big one for me. And then assuming no Zay Flowers, I think we will see a lot of two tight end stuff, and Isaiah Likely can continue to have success the way he's had of late. So back on Underdog, we can see where are these guys now? Mark Andrews, 45.5 receiving yards, same as when I first gave out that play. And then Isaiah Likely now up to 27.5. Originally gave it out at 24.5. I still like it at 27.5. Probably not as much as I like the Mark Andrews 45.5, but both of these guys should be good. And the Andrews one, probably a little bit safer at the moment, just because even if Zay Flowers does surprisingly suit up and play, I'm still going to really like Andrews at the number. Isaiah Likely might not see the field as often, especially with Nelson Aguilar expected back. So I wouldn't like the 27 if Zay Flowers did suit up the way that I like it right now. Let's see, anything else from this game? On the Baltimore defensive side, they don't allow explosive runs. They don't allow explosive passes. Throughout the season, the way to beat this team has been explosives, and it's been with the wide receiver one. But ever since Kyle Hamilton was moved to that free safety position, that has just kind of stopped. So if we now go to the efficiency and look at the explosive yards allowed in the passing game, you'll see Baltimore way down now. 32nd, only 225 explosive passing yards allowed in those 6 games. So what they were at the beginning of the season, like this is why I like just using the second half of the season, not just because it paints a different picture, but we can point to a very specific change that they made, moving Kyle Hamilton to that free safety position. As our guy Shazam in the chat said, like, who would have thought that moving a superstar player to the position that he is best in would actually help the defense? But it doesn't matter the reasoning, doesn't matter the logic of what they were doing. What matters is what they are doing now, and that is really kind of shutting down those explosive passes. So I don't really see a path to success for this Pittsburgh offense. Sorry, Stranger. Sorry, Frank. And sorry, any other Steelers fans watching. But Baltimore should be able to have success against the blitz. I think Pittsburgh's only hope here, as many probably know, is winning a low-scoring game and just kind of making Lamar Jackson look like not himself all night. But I think that we would still see Derrick Henry do enough to make it work there. And there's nothing in this matchup that says it's a great spot for Derrick Henry. There's nothing that says it's a bad spot for Derrick Henry. He's just Derrick Henry. And actually, like what we saw the last time against Pittsburgh and a bunch down the stretch of the season, is a lot of teams decided we are not going to let Lamar keep the ball. We're going to force Derrick Henry to beat us, just because it's easier to stop one than it is to stop 2 guys when you don't know where the ball's going. So to that point, and to how good that they have been against scrambles, I do think Lamar Jackson under 48 rushing yards is a good play. It's a scary as hell play, because we know that when you get to playoff time, some of these quarterbacks are more willing to lean on their legs and make plays with their legs. We've seen it from Mahomes. We've seen it from Josh Allen. We've seen it to some degree from Lamar Jackson. But I think under 48.5 in this matchup is strong. I haven't placed it yet, but it's definitely on the list of things that I am considering. Next up, we get Denver and Buffalo. I also want to make a note here. 2 things. First, as I mentioned, StatsHub is free for the week. You just need to sign up at FTN Fantasy. Quick reminder. Also, we have a free NFL DFS contest running for the Sunday slate only this week. You need to be a subscriber, in the sense that you need to be able to get into the Discord to get that link. It's free to enter. There's $500 total in the prize pool, $250 to first place. Top 5 positions get paid. Min cash is equal to your first month subscription price. So get in there and play. This contest should be a lot of fun. And there are going to be a lot of our FTN analysts, not just the DFS analysts, all across the FTN space. Everybody's getting in there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And there has been talk, nothing official yet, but there has been talk of a last place punishment for FTN analysts only. So make sure you're in the contest. It's going to be a ton of fun. All right, Denver and Buffalo. Let's see, where do I want to start with this game? Let's go back here and let's take a look at this Denver defense. I think is pretty interesting to look at. I know Shazam was talking about the fact that they have kind of feasted against bad offenses, and maybe they've been a little bit vulnerable against good offenses. I kind of think it's more that they had like 2 or 3 down games, and every other game they've just been good. And sometimes the down game, like against Jameis Winston and that Cleveland offense, didn't come against a great offense. It just came kind of out of nowhere. But we know two things about this defense. They're going to play a lot of man. They like to blitz. And I should say three things. They also give up a lot after the catch. And so the first two things, man and blitz, let's take a look at that first. So let me go back to here. And in fact, we already have the blitz stats up. So I might as well just change the team that we're looking at. And let's go to Denver. Let's get rid of Baltimore. So, well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted Buffalo. Okay. So, first of all, DYAR. Amari Cooper leads the way. He's only played 8 games with this team, but Amari Cooper leads the way. Also, a phenomenal yards per route run number against the blitz here for Amari Cooper. Khalil Shakir, pretty good as well at 2.5 yards per route run. Not quite as good on the DYAR front, but he almost never is because he doesn't get targeted down the field. So in order to be really good from a DVOA or DYAR perspective, you need to have those explosive plays. He doesn't really get them. But what he does do is get yards after the catch. And so when we flip it to yards after the catch, you can see this one isn't really particularly close. It is Khalil Shakir, although yards after the catch per reception, Keon Coleman has been pretty good in that regard as well. So if I had to guess like which of these Buffalo receivers gets an explosive play or multiple explosive plays, I'm going to go Keon Coleman. If you want to ask me who I think is the most likely to have success, it's Khalil Shakir. But if you want to ask me like who is the guy who could really outperform expectations because of the matchup, it is Amari Cooper. And let's go back to let's go to coverages here and take a look, because we also said that Denver plays a lot of man coverage. And so let's take a look at that. Man yards per route run. Amari Cooper, 4.2 and only 1.8 against zone coverages here with this Buffalo team. So lots pointing here to Amari Cooper. And then also check out these splits for Keon Coleman, 2.4 yards per route run against man coverage, 0.7 against zone. One of the questions here is which of these guys is most likely to see Pat Surtain. I don't have the answer for you guys yet. I'm going to wait and see. I don't know if Jeff has updated the wide receiver cornerbacks tool or the shadow index, but I'll take a look at that as well kind of throughout the week and see. Maybe the answer is whichever one of Cooper or Coleman we don't expect to see a ton of Surtain, go there. If it's going to be kind of a mix throughout the game, then I just kind of don't care that much about the matchup. And I think either of these guys could have success. So yeah, that's kind of it for me on the Buffalo front. Not much to talk about in the rushing department of this one. For at least for the Buffalo side, I think maybe the best argument for James Cook is that it's the playoffs, so we might see less Ty Johnson and Ray Davis than we saw in the regular season. But he's been so boom or bust, not just in terms of his volume and his production, but also just like in his efficiency, his success rate. It's not just like an explosive play thing. His success rate too has been really volatile. So I don't really know what to say about James Cook. I guess that just means if he's low owned, use him on DraftKings. If he's chalk, maybe you don't. But we will see on that front. On the other side, Buffalo likes to play a lot of zone, and then they are just a fantastic matchup for running backs. And where I actually want to start here, let's look at the full season for this. Let me clear these filters. Let's go to the rushing tab, and let's look at run types. Let's see. Yeah, we do have yards per attempt allowed here. So, whoops, that's not what I want. I want to go to defense. Rushing run types. So Buffalo, not great against the inside zone. They're also not great against the outside zone. If we were looking at the last 7 weeks, you'd see this even a larger degree, but they have just been vulnerable against the run all season. You can also see it in the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. They've been a great matchup for running backs kind of throughout the season, which is very rare, by the way, for a team that leads as often as Buffalo does, for them to be good against running backs. Most of the time we would see their bad matchup for running backs, and it wouldn't necessarily be because running backs can't have success against them. It's that they often get game scripted out. So when you see a very good team, a very good offense that's vulnerable against running backs like this, plus 13%, it says a lot about the success rate against them and the ability to have success against them, which is most noteworthy to me because now as we go to players, and let's go to rushing efficiency. Oops. It's kind of a no-brainer about which of these Denver running backs should be getting the touches. And sure enough, it actually has been this way of late. When you sort by DYAR, let me uncheck this qualified box so that we get estimate in there. But McLaughlin, 57 DYAR, estimate 22. And then where's Javonte Williams? Negative 64, negative 19% DVOA for him. Like McLaughlin has just been far and away the best runner on the team. And when we go to inside zones and outside zones, you will see the exact same thing. So let's go here. Let's look at yards per attempt. And you'll see 4.2 yards per attempt on inside zones, easily the best on the team. And outside zones is where he like really, really separates. 5 versus 2.7 for Javonte Williams. And the DYR is even more extreme than this. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and take a look at that? Give you guys a sense of how to do that if you want to do it yourself, but concept inside zone, let's take a look here and see. DYAR. McLaughlin, I mean, it's not great. It's only 8, but look where the other guys are. Javonte Williams, negative 10, estimate, negative 17, the DVOA, negative 13.6, negative 23.8, and then you get to outside zones, and again, you see the same idea. So when we look at the fact that McLaughlin saw 16 carries last week, look at this, 41 and about plus 10%, estimate 9, 22.6%, and then Javonte Williams again, nowhere to be found. Big time negative for him as well. It's just so incredibly clear. We should be seeing Javonte Williams, or we should be seeing Jaleel McLaughlin over and over and over again from this team when they try to run the ball. And again, like this Buffalo team is very susceptible to the ground game. I think we will see Denver, number one, like they have to try to run the ball just to keep this Josh Allen offense off the field. But we also see it in the adjusted line yards allowed to some degree. Let's see, where is Buffalo here? The biggest thing, they are 22nd in running back yards allowed and 24th in second level yards allowed and 31st in open field yards allowed. So even though they are 5th in adjusted line yards allowed, essentially what that says is which running back can create the yards for themselves and get the explosive plays. It's not estimate. It's not Javonte Williams. It's Jaleel McLaughlin. So favorite pick of the entire week over on Underdog. Our subscribers have already gotten this a few times now. Jaleel McLaughlin over now 31.5 rushing yards. We already hammered it at 30.5, but I would probably be playing this at 39.5, to be honest with you guys. So 31.5, still a fantastic value here for McLaughlin. Let's see here. I think that does it for this game, honestly. There's not a ton in the passing game. I will mention, I did mention Buffalo does play a lot of zone. They do not like to blitz. But the weird thing is, no matter what split you use, the efficiency for all of these Denver receivers, pretty much the same. Like it's Marvin Mims is really efficient. Cortland Sutton is the guy who gets all the volume and therefore is efficient as well. And then everyone else is just kind of there. And no matter what you're looking at, that story doesn't change. So it's basically a bet on does Marvin Mims have an explosive play or not. It is worth noting Mims has seen his snap share go up. He's seen his targets go up. A lot of that is because they're designing stuff for him. Like we had over 20.5 receiving yards for Marvin Mims this past week. He caught a 29-yard screen pass touchdown on the opening drive, and it was a very well-designed play. It's only being designed for Marvin Mims on this team. They're not designing that for anybody else. So he does have a path to get there, but his price is also now over $5,000 against this Buffalo team over on DraftKings. So I don't love that. And let's see, what was his line now? Whoops, I'm going to the wrong tab. There it is. So Mims is now, look at that, 44.5 rushing plus receiving, 38.5 receiving yards. I don't think it's terrible, but it is a lot higher than the 28.5 that we got on him last week. Shows what a good number that was. And I think Buffalo is a little bit more equipped to slow him down than that Kansas City defense was a week ago. So, it's not a strong lean on Mims, but I do think it's fine to play. And I think from a DFS perspective, it just entirely depends on his ownership. He's going to be boom or bust because he's so dependent on that explosive play. At his price, I kind of think he'll be contrarian, but if he was cheap, I would know for sure that he was going to be chalky. So it really could go either way when it comes to his ownership this week. Let's move on. 3 games down, 3 to go. My Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. This is a really fascinating matchup. Where do I even want to start here? So let me talk instead about the Green Bay and Minnesota game a couple weeks ago. Shazam, our guy in chat, was kind of all over this. Minnesota is one of the most zone-heavy teams in the entire league, but against Green Bay, Christian Watson, they played a ton of man coverage. They basically said, we don't think that you have the personnel to beat man coverage. Teams have also been blitzing Jordan Love a ton. Same idea, just saying you guys can't get open quick enough, so we're going to come after you. We're going to play a lot of man, and they had a ton of success. Well, let's take a look at who plays the most man coverage in the league, or I think it's the second most man coverage in the league. In this time frame, it is the Philadelphia Eagles, and they play man coverage exceptionally well. They get a ton of pressure, and there's no Christian Watson. The Green Bay Packers do a couple things very, very well, one of which is they create explosives in the passing game. So you're already now like taking away one of their biggest strengths by not having Christian Watson on the field, but then you also are facing a defense in the Philadelphia Eagles that is number 1 on the entire season in not allowing explosive passes. So I think this is going to be a really, really difficult matchup, which I very much enjoy saying. It could come to bite me in the ass, but I think this is a particularly tough matchup for this Green Bay offense. In fact, I'd go so far as to say, I don't necessarily think the Eagles are better than the Lions or the Vikings. In fact, I probably think the Lions are the best team in the NFC. I think there's almost no question that this is the hardest matchup for the Packers to find success in the NFC. So that makes me happy as an Eagles fan, but we'll see what actually happens. I'll be there on Sunday afternoon, by the way. So hopefully that goes as planned. Otherwise, as I joked the other day, you might find me at the bottom of the Schuylkill River. So what's next from this game? Lots of single high as well from Philly, which again, that would have been Christian Watson's music. No Christian Watson. It really allows them to do what they want to do now. Philly doesn't like to blitz typically, but we have seen Vic Fangio change that up in certain matchups. This could be one of them. I think what Fangio will most likely do is he will try to play his typical style of defense. Instead of using blitzers to get after Love, I think he might use safeties being brought into the box, things of that nature to help them stop Josh Jacobs in the running game. And if they are facing the pass and they're not getting the pressure the way they want to, then maybe he would start to look towards the blitz. But if he doesn't have to blitz, I don't think that he will. On the other side, we have just as extreme. In fact, we have a more extreme tendency. Look how much more zone coverage Green Bay has played than any other team. 73.8%. Second most is Tampa at 62.8% in this time frame. If we go to the Eagles, the answer for who does this help actually turns out to be pretty straightforward. Let's go take a look at exactly that. I don't even remember which filter I have on right here. Let me just clear all the filters. And let's go to receiving coverage, teams, and let's take a look at Philly so we get the full picture here. Green Bay also very good because they play so much zone at preventing the deep throws, so they're operating more or they're weakest on some of those shorter throws, which does help Devontae Smith quite a bit. And here you go. Against man, 3.9 yards per out run for A.J. Brown, 2.4 against zone. So it's a down matchup for A.J. Brown, 2.2 against man for Devontae Smith, 2.7 against zone. It's a better matchup for Devontae And then Dallas Goedert as well, 2.9 against man, 1.5 against zone. So big downgrade in the matchup for A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert because of how much zone Green Bay plays, and a positive matchup for Devontae Smith. So I love Devontae Smith over on DraftKings, especially $3,900 for Dallas Goedert. I expect him to be very, very popular. If Goddard has something like 4 for 40 and Devontae Smith has a really big game and you hit correctly on a different tight end, maybe it's Zach Ertz, someone like that, you get a huge advantage. You can kind of kill two birds with one stone with the Devontae Smith play, which is why I think there's a good chance that he is a slate breaker for me on that Sunday slate. And I'd also have a lot of interest in Devontae Smith on the 6-gamer as well because of this. On Underdog, I do think that you can go to Devontae Smith, but it is worth noting 59.5 is not a low number for a wide receiver 2 in the playoffs. So it's not my strongest play. I know what my strongest play is from this game. It's Jordan Love under 224.5 passing yards. And actually, one of the reasons why I don't love the Devontae Smith pick is kind of the same as why I love this Jordan Love under. It's not just that I don't think Love and this Green Bay passing attack is going to be successful against Philly. It's that Philly can do such an incredible job of slowing the game down, of just controlling the ball, draining clock. We've seen like 18-play, 12-minute drives from this offense in the last few months. It's unbelievable the way they have done that. Would it be great for Devontae? Would be fantastic for this under on Jordan Love. So McLaughlin over 31.5 rushing yards and Jordan Love under 224.5 passing yards. Far and away, my 2 favorite plays of the week so far. Everything else that I have noted here, I don't love the way I love these 2. Let's see, anything else from this game that I had written down? Green Bay also rarely blitzes. There's not a ton in the data for like who that points to from Philly, but I will mention the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data does show that this actually is a decent matchup for Dallas Goedert, and Green Bay is really just like a sea of lightish red across the board, -12, -14, -11. So I'm not scared by this number at all for Devontae Smith. I think it's still really good, but it is worth noting like it's just not a good matchup kind of for anybody. Potentially Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith, the only exceptions there. But I think the zone coverage, because that's such an extreme tendency, overrules this DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data for me. But it's also worth pointing out, look how bad of a matchup Philly is for everybody. This defense has just been incredible this season. I don't think I've ever been a fan of a team who had a unit go from as bad as the Philly defense was last season to as good as the Philly defense has been this season. It's been a lot of fun to watch. -16% for quarterbacks, -26 for running backs. A very difficult spot for Josh Jacobs, even though I think he'll be force-fed a ton of volume in this game. -30 for tight ends, -22 for wide receiver 2s, -7 for wide receiver 1s. I don't even know who we'd qualify as the wide receiver 3 for them at this point. Probably Dontavian Wicks, but this number was a lot worse early in the season. And then Cooper DeJean came into town and started playing the slot instead of Avonte Maddox, and that kind of changed everything. That's honestly like maybe even the turning point of the Eagles season. I'm sure they would have been much improved regardless, but Cooper DeJean has been fantastic and has just made this defense a bad matchup for absolutely everybody. 2 games left. One other thing I should say here. It's not a good matchup by any means for Saquon Barkley, but the Green Bay defense, I mentioned earlier, like they do 2 things very, very well. This team, explosive passes being one. The other is the pass rush and just the defensive front as a whole. In the same analysis that Frank was doing, he had this Green Bay front, the 3rd best in the league. One of the other reasons why I think that this matchup is particularly bad for Green Bay is that advantage, or in any other matchup, like that's an advantage for this Green Bay defense. But against the Eagles offensive line, the trenches are still probably going to be won by this Philadelphia team. So I think it's a fine spot for Saquon just because I think that's always true. There isn't a matchup in which I don't think Saquon can succeed. And like I said, I think the Eagles might be able to really kind of dominate time of possession in this one, which would also be good for Saquon. The only kind of point against I have for Saquon is it's the playoffs now. So they get first and down at the 2. It's not, hey, let's see if Saquon can get one before we go to the tush push. It's, we got to guarantee ourselves a touchdown. They're going right to the tush push. Maybe they won't because of Hurts' head, but I don't personally think that's going to be an issue. So tush push kind of has me not loving Saquon at his massive DraftKings price for either the 3-gamer or the 6-gamer. But if he is contrarian, if he's a lot lower owned than Bucky Irving and Josh Jacobs, for example, then I'd be interested in Saquon. It's like there's nothing on paper here that says it's a good matchup, but it's just Saquon Barkley behind the Eagles offensive line with the threat on the outside of A.J. Brown. There's just not a lot that teams can do to prevent the big play. And it only takes one for Saquon to become optimal with the way that he has exploded on the ground this season. Okay, next game. Let's see. First, Albert asking, do I like Devontae Smith receiving yards or longest reception better? Let's see. What is his longest reception? So as I mentioned, this Green Bay team does not allow deep passes. Aaron Schatz talked about how they are much more vulnerable than this Philly team to short passing. And there's a chance that Devontae could get there either on just one of those rare long receptions or by taking like an 8-yard slant for 24 yards or something. But I think the more likely path here is that Devontae Smith has 7 receptions for 70 yards, something like that, and doesn't go over the 21.5. So I will say I like the receiving yards more than the longest reception, but don't love either here. Appreciate the question. And like I said, anybody can ask questions throughout this show. Now to what I think is probably the most exciting game from a fantasy football perspective, and that is Tampa and Washington. And so first, let's go to some of these tendencies. We're already on zone coverage, 62.8% zone rate for Tampa Bay. That is the second highest. We also see, surprisingly, most of the time, zone goes with 2 high, man goes with single high, but Tampa really flips that. They have actually played the 4th most single high, which means they're playing a lot of cover 3, by the way, which we do have the capability of filtering to. I don't like to filter to specific coverages. For one thing, like each team plays that coverage a little bit differently. I think the larger kind of zoomed out version, the single high, 2 high, man versus zone, is going to be more predictive, not because it's more specific, but because it gives us better sample sizes. Football already is a small sample size sport. I want to keep the sample as relevant as possible, but also as large as possible. So I don't feel the need to go as specific as just against cover 3. And I think people who often like to do that end up pointing to small sample variants a lot more than they end up pointing to some actual signal. But so when we're evaluating Washington, guys, we want to see how they do against single high. We want to see how they do against zone coverage. We also need to see how they do against the blitz. We go to pressure rates. You guys might remember this already. We took a look at blitz rates earlier, but Tampa Bay, 47% blitz rate in these last 6 games for them. Just a massive number. So who on Washington stands to benefit from these tendencies? The answer happens to be pretty consistent across the board. If we go to Washington, let's start. Whoops. Gotta wait for it to actually load here. Teams, Washington. So we get single high. No doubt who's at the top here. It's Terry McLaurin. You also get a lot of Austin Eckler. That could end up being interesting. Zacchaeus looking pretty good here, although he's better against 2 high. He's actually just been quite effective for them. Zach Ertz, 1.3 against single high, 1.7 against 2 high. So that's not great for him. But against zone, we see a lot of the same. Once again, Terry McLaurin at the top. Now we get Zacchaeus showing up. We also get Ertz showing up a little bit here at 1.8 yards per route run. That's actually his best split. Zacchaeus' best split. McLaurin looks good, which take a look at this. Like, just look at how high these zone numbers are compared to the man numbers. And you can see very clearly Jaden Daniels has been better against zone coverage. Tampa loves to play zone. It's a bit of a catch-22 here in a couple ways. Number one, Tampa plays as much zone as they do for a reason. They don't think they could be as good at man coverage. So if they want to just change the way Minnesota did for Green Bay, I think they're a little bit less capable of making that change. But also, if you play more man coverage, now what are you more susceptible to? Scrambles. And you're facing Jaden Daniels, who led the NFL in scramble yards this season. So that aspect is really difficult as well, particularly if they want to continue to blitz the way they like to blitz. So that's the last thing that we want to look at here. Let's go to efficiency, and let's turn on the blitz filter. And I'm doing this. I'm looking at the coverage tab a lot to save time here on this show. But personally, I always will now look at I will use the advanced filter on the efficiency page so that I can also see DYAR. I mean, look at this separation that Terry McLaurin has in DYAR against his counterparts against the blitz. Also a massive separation here in yards per run, 2.9. Next best is 1.3 for active guys in this game. So, again, we do see Austin Eckler here a little bit. So that's at least interesting. You can also, by the way, do some filtering at the same time. Like, what if we would just want to look at zone blitzes? Who does best against zone blitzes? Well, now we see McLaurin at 3.5. Zach Ertz does jump to 2.2. Eckler jumps to 2.0. Zacchaeus kind of falls off the table to 0.8. Not a whole lot of DYR against zone blitzes, but that's partially because, I mean, we're looking at 42 routes total. So again, like, I don't love looking at these combinations because the sample size gets tiny, but if you're going to see a lot of combinations here, it's going to be against a team like Tampa. So don't hate doing this. But I think largely my point here is Washington is set up for success because Tampa is a major pass funnel. They are so good against the run. Washington has seemingly been content to just put the ball in Jaden Daniels' hands of late. So I love that from a fantasy perspective. Get more pass volume, get more scramble opportunities the more they drop back. When they throw, it looks like Terry McLaurin is set up for a smash spot here. And I also think you could throw in Ertz, you could throw in Eckler, you could throw in Zacchaeus as well. But I do think my order of preference would be McLaurin number one by kind of a mile, and then Ertz probably second. I don't think I love anything on the prop side for this game. Let me see. Where was the rushing for Jaden Daniels? 45.5, I do think is low. Where do we have him projected? We have Jaden Daniels projected for 57 rushing yards. So I think the over 45.5 rushing yards for Jaden Daniels does intrigue me. The difficulty there is what happens if Tampa just sells out to stop the scrambling, and now Jaden Daniels just picks them apart through the air. So it's not as strong of a play as some of these others, but I do think it is a pretty good one. McLaurin, 61.5 receiving yards, I think is pretty good. Might be a little more interested in laddering him than just that standard number, but those numbers aren't great. Let's see. 23.5 longest reception. Maybe, let's see. What has he done in that department? $32, $25, $86. I think he's hit in 8 games. So yeah, I don't love that. Like, it's tough. I think sometimes you find guys who are better prop plays than DFS plays. I think these guys are far better DFS plays than prop plays in my mind, just because McLaurin can be. I mean, we've seen him disappear at times in games, and I just think he's priced pretty well here. But man, it's also like maybe he's one of the rare opportunities to go to fantasy points instead, because he's been such a fantastic touchdown scorer. So he could have a game where he goes 4 for 50 and a touchdown, and he's hitting the fantasy points, but not the yards. Very rarely do I ever suggest going to fantasy points for a receiver instead of the yards, but I think this could be one of the rare times. Mike Evans, actually on the other side of this game, one of the other guys that I think you can actually justify doing so with. Let's see. Speaking of, Washington plays the most man coverage. So let's go back to the tendencies page. And let's take a look. Whoops, I'm on passing now. Passing coverage. Most man coverage in this time belongs to Washington. That is pretty spectacular for Mike Evans, as we'll see. they also are good against scrambles. Let's see. Is that correct? Let me, what I wrote down in my notes is a little bit confusing to me. So we're just going to take a look at this together. Oops, I'm on base. I want to go to advanced filtering. Oh, for scrambles, I want the full season sample size. Reason why I want the full season sample size on scramble stuff is because scrambles, your ability to defend scrambles is very dependent on who you've actually played. And I want the signal to be about how they defend anybody, not just who have they played in the last 5 weeks. So, if you do a really good job against Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels, you're going to give up more scrambling yards on average than if you played Matt Stafford, for example. So that's why I want the full season sample here. But let's go rushing, advanced filtering, run concepts, scramble to true. And let's take a look. So yeah, Washington, 6th lowest EPA allowed, and looks like they are pretty good in the yards allowed department as well. So a little bit tougher potentially for Baker Mayfield to scramble than has often been the case this season. He's been really, really good with his legs, picking up some really key first downs, things of that nature. So might be a tougher spot in that regard for Baker, which is yet another reason to go to the Jaden Daniels side if you are stacking either of these teams. And the other thing for Jaden Daniels and for the rushing is, notice here, Tampa, 13th most scramble yards allowed and a lot of EPA allowed, 4th most EPA allowed on scramble. So in addition to like that catch-22 where they play a lot of zone, so think of it this way. They're already giving up a lot of scrambles despite playing a ton of zone coverage. Typically is easier to stop scrambles. Why? Because all defenders are looking back at the quarterback. They can see the scramble sooner and react to it, whereas in man coverage, your head is turned the other way. You don't even notice that the guy has taken off. So they're already susceptible to scrambles. The coverages are actually pointing towards maybe they try to play more man than usual because of how much better Jaden has been through the air against zone than man. But if they do that, now they're even more susceptible to those scrambles. So this might be a case where maybe you even over on the prop side of things, maybe you just take. Do they have fantasy points for Jaden Daniels? They do. They've got 22.55 fantasy points for Jaden Daniels. I'm not opposed to just taking that for him, honestly. I think Jaden really should be quite good in this game. The game environment as well, too, because this Tampa offense can put up points. Jaden has to chase them. That could be great for him as well. Big fan of Jaden this week. And then on the Tampa side, I mentioned the heavy man rate that Washington plays. So let's take a quick look before we move on and do anything else at the efficiency numbers for the Tampa receivers against man coverage. So I'm a player, I want efficiency. And let's take a look at man coverage. Actually, you know what? First, before we do that, whoops, I'm in the wrong spot. I'm still in the wrong spot. Receiving coverage. Let's first look at some of these splits, and then we'll go and take a look at the DYAR data as well. So, man, teams, Tampa Bay. Let's get that qualified filter on. Man yards per run, 2.8 for Evans. We can throw Godwin out of there, 1.4 for McMillan, 1.0 for Otten. Bucky Irving, I think this is actually really key, 0.7 yards per run for Bucky Irving compared to 2.3 against zone. That is really, really important here. You can also see 0.9 against single high, 2.6 against two high. It's essentially like if Tampa Bay can't throw the ball down the field, they run those quick screen type stuff to Bucky and try to pick up 6-8 yards at a time. In this matchup, I think we will see them try to get the ball downfield, particularly to Mike Evans. And if we look at the efficiency department and turn on man coverage, we will see more of the same. Here in the DYAR numbers, you can see there Mike Evans doing quite well. Nobody else doing very well against man coverage, 25% DVOA. Second best is actually Rachaad White, 24%. We saw Rachaad White play basically not at all last week. I don't know what their plan will be for him this week, but I would expect a heavy dose of Bucky Irving on the field just because he's been so incredible for them. And Rachaad White has not. So probably Mike Evans game. In fact, I think there's a very good chance this week that Bucky Irving is going to be mega chalk and Mike Evans won't be. Maybe you just flip that. Maybe you use Evans as the bring back instead of Bucky Irving in a Washington stack, and you can make it pretty contrarian that way. A good chance that that's my approach on Sunday, at least at this moment in time. Final game here. We are already an hour in. This Minnesota-Los Angeles game only on the 6-game slate. Of course, there will also be a showdown, but there are some really intriguing things here that maybe we can hit in the props department. So I just noticed that you guys haven't been seeing this tab as I was talking through the Tampa Bay stuff. So apologies there, but I was talking through it all. So I know I at least was saying it. If you were listening, you could see all that was going on. Let's see, what was the last thing that I was on this last page? I'm not even sure. Regardless, you know what? Let me quick just run through some of this Washington stuff again, just to make sure that you guys saw it. So I want to go to Washington here. It's a problem with having so many different StatsHub tabs open. So I clicked the wrong one, but so McLaurin, this is against man coverage. I want to look at zone coverage first. In fact, let me get out of this here. Let's go to coverages first. Let's look at the splits that way. Again, I can't remember. You guys might have already seen this, but that's not what I wanted. I want this. Against single high, Terry McLaurin at the top. Against zone, we once again see Terry McLaurin at the top. Zacchaeus, Ertz both benefit. So this is what I was mentioning. Like, look how much better these yards per hour run numbers are against zone than against man, which means Jaden Daniels has been a lot better against zone than against man. So that's when you get the catch-22 stuff that we were talking through. And then against the blitz, it is far and away Terry McLaurin ahead of everybody else. So let me turn off. Oh, I already have those filters off. So let's go back to play situation, turn blitz on. And now we'll see DYAR is just phenomenal for Terry McLaurin. Decent for Ertz against the blitz. And I think there's also just an element of like, it's Jaden Daniels' first playoff game. He's going to have to complete some passes in some big moments. You go to Mr. Dependable in those moments. You go to Zach Ertz, won a Super Bowl as the go-to guy in those clutch key moments as well for Philadelphia. So I think, as I said, Ertz clearly number one for me. Ertz probably a clear number two for me in this game. And then you go to Zacchaeus, maybe you go to Eckler, but it's also noteworthy. Like, look how bad Zacchaeus has been against zone, surprisingly, given how effective he's been elsewhere. But time to move on to this final game. Minnesota and the Rams. There's a lot to talk about here. So first, let's go to the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. Let's take a look at this Minnesota team. Notice what an incredible wide receiver funnel this team is. Bad for quarterbacks, bad for running backs, bad for tight ends, good across the board for receivers, especially wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s. Now, the other thing this Minnesota defense likes to do, they're actually like almost a carbon copy of this Tampa Bay defense. The difference being, instead of playing a lot of single high, they play a lot of two high, but they also play a lot of zone and they blitz a ton. The zone stuff and the two high stuff, there's not really anybody that stands out on the Los Angeles side. Where we finally get something really noteworthy is in the blitz data. So here we have the blitz filter on for Washington. I'm going to take Washington out. I'm going to put Los Angeles in instead. And take a look at this. Yards per hour run against the blitz. Puka Nacua is at 5.1 yards per hour run. Now, the DYAR isn't spectacular. 133, 46 for Cooper Kupp, 3.3 yards per hour run. Now, you might look at this and you might say, okay, so Puka really separates. He's clearly the best. I shouldn't look at Kupp. I should just look at Puka. Not so fast. Let's get rid of the team filter and let's just look at yards per hour run against the blitz amongst the entire league. Puka is ahead by 1.1 yards per hour run, which is insane. But Cooper Kupp is still 7th. Stafford is just really, really good against the blitz. So we have seen Minnesota be very amenable, if you will, with their game plan to what the opponent likes to do. We saw it against Green Bay. We might see it here too, where they blitz a lot less than they typically do. That does mean that like we can't just look at this data and say, okay, we should go all in on Puka. We should go all in Cooper Kupp. We can't do that because Minnesota can change the way that they play defense. They have more answers than almost any other defense in the league in that regard. And Brian Flores certainly has a big hand in that level of success. I think maybe what I'd look at is the success for wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s against this Minnesota team to maybe make a bet on Kupp or Demarcus Robinson, maybe even Tutu Atwell in this one. I'm guessing that some of those lines are going to be really low. So let's go take a look at that. Demarcus Robinson, 24.5 receiving yards. I think I like that. Tutu Atwell, only 9.5. So like that's basically just, is Tutu Atwell on the field a decent amount this game or not? We should probably take a look at some of the routes run data in like week 17, week 16 to answer that question. I won't do that now since we're already over an hour. Where is Cooper Kupp? 49.5 for Cooper Kupp. That to me is really strong. And along those lines, let's do one more thing here with this Los Angeles team. Let's see efficiency. Let me get rid of the blitz filter, and let me instead look at alignment. Let's do this. Let's go to Los Angeles here. So Cooper Kupp playing 63.6% of the time in the slot, 2.1 yards per out run in the slot. That's better than his out wide yards per out run. You can see Puka, doesn't really matter where he lines up, 3.4 out wide, 3.3 in the slot. Tutu Atwell also better from the slot than out wide. Demarcus Robinson, really bad yards per out run numbers. You can see here, like this is why I would like to be able to bet on Tutu Atwell. The question is just, is he actually on the field? So let's do a couple things here. First, let's stay with LA. Let's go to efficiency, and let's look at some route run data from week 17. Like this is the problem, right? Tutu Atwell only ran 4 routes. Can't bet on Tutu if he's only going to be out there 4 times. Marcus Robinson got 28 routes, 0 yards. Also hard to bet on him. Cooper Kupp only 29 yards in this game. I'm guessing we're going to find more of the same in week 16. So this is a bit of a tough one. I really, really wish that we could count on Tutu being on the field. I think it's probably still worth the bet on Tutu because there's definitely a chance that Minnesota has the lead and Los Angeles knows they have to come from behind. And Demarcus Robinson isn't on the field because they think he's a better receiver who's going to produce more in the receiving game than Tutu. They just think he does his job a little bit better, or he's better as a run blocker, that sort of thing. So if they're playing from behind, I think there's a little bit more of a chance that Tutu would end up seeing the field. But let's answer the question here for Cooper Kupp, which is how these different teams defend the slot. So if I go to advanced filtering, you know what? Do I want to use last 7 weeks for this one? Yes, I do. So we're going to go last 7 weeks, receiving, efficiency. Yeah, let's do this. Let's go EPA, and let's use the advanced filter, route location, alignment, slot. Where is Minnesota here? And then let's compare where they are here to where they are out wide. And I'm guessing, okay, so they're actually pretty good. Actually really good. Look at that. They're the best against the slot. So I'm going to take back my thought on Cooper Kupp. I think the move would actually be Demarcus Robinson, believe it or not. Usually better against man, which I don't love, but we could see Minnesota change that up as well. Man, this might just be an avoid Los Angeles situation where Minnesota just might be able to really contain them. On the other side of the ball, Los Angeles, great for tight ends, good for wide receiver ones. They do allow explosives in the run game. We haven't seen a ton of explosives from Aaron Jones. Could be a sneaky spot in the props market, though, for Cam Akers. Why? Because if we look at rushing, we look at efficiency, and we look at explosive rushing rate. Let's get rid of quarterback. So I'm going to go filter. Position contains running back. Cam Akers, second highest explosive rush percentage in the league, 268 explosive rushing yards. Let's compare that to Aaron Jones. Wouldn't have expected this coming into the season, but Aaron Jones, about half the explosive rushing rate of Cam Akers. And he's getting so many more carries and isn't that far ahead in explosive yards from Cam Akers. So maybe this is one of those where we actually see Cam Akers perform to some degree. He's been given opportunities, and I don't think he's been given opportunities just because they're saving Aaron Jones. Cam Akers, only 22.5 rushing yards is his prop. I'm going to be over on that one. I think I like that one a decent amount as well. 8.5 for his longest rush. You know what? More than the rushing yards, I like going to longest rush. I think you can take the over 8.5. I think you could go 9.5 for 1.1x. This is a really good ladder opportunity as well. He's going to get some carries. Maybe he breaks one, and I think these are pretty good. Let's see, what does his longest rush look like throughout the season this year? So by game, 58 in this last one. 16, 3, 11, 25, 18, 15, 12, 11, 13, 0, 0, 1, 15, 15, 9, 13. So that 11 number looks spectacular. Or over 9.5 for 1.11x looks spectacular for Cam Akers. I will definitely be taking that. And then I think 19.5 and 29.5. Let's see. He's got a 25. He's got a 58. Okay, those don't look as good based on his results this season, but any of those could be just a little bit longer. He had 0 carries for 0 yards in the first game against the Rams this season. So I like the ladder opportunities. I'm definitely gonna hit this 1.11x on 9.5 for Cam Akers. That will do it for the matchup show. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We will be on Friday, myself and Tugun, talking about all 6 games, but particularly the Sunday slate. Catch you then. Goodbye.